Hello Blender heads! In this lesson I'm going to show you where you can get motion capture data and how you can apply it to your own characters. Now one of the things that really bothers me about most motion capture tutorials out there is that they just go and download some motion capture data, match it to their character, add an armature and call it a day. And this kind of works, but what if you, or worse your client, wants you to make some tweaks to that animation? Let's say that you were using this basketball bouncing animation and your client says, yep, that's great, but could you just make her stand up slightly straighter? Now, if you were using a regular rig, this would be extremely easy. You just grab the hip controller and lift. Problem solved. But with this motion capture rig, it's not so easy. Because the legs don't have IK constraints, the whole rig lifts up when we move the hips. Okay, so what if we grab the next spine up? Nope, that just stretches the torso. What you have to do is lift the hips and then try and rotate the thigh, knee and foot bones and put those back into place. This is a process called counter-keying. It's when moving one bone forces you to move multiple other bones just to get a simple pose right. And trust me, it sucks. Because once you've spent about 15 minutes or so getting all of your bones counter-keyed, you suddenly realize you have to do this on every single frame. Needless to say, this is not how animators in the industry work. So today I'm going to show you the right way to do motion capture in a process called retargeting. Retargeting is where you take the animation from your motion capture rig and instead of applying it straight to your character, you apply it to a proper rig, such as the Rigify rig. Retargeting requires you to take each bone from your motion capture and apply it to the corresponding bone on your target rig. Now this can be a fairly tedious process and unfortunately it's not one that Blender does by default easily. So to really do this properly, you're going to need a copy of AutoRig Pro. Now, this is a paid add-on, which admittedly kind of sucks. The only free add-on I know of that does this retargeting is the Rokoko Addon, which is designed for the Rokoko motion capture suit, but I've had mixed results with it so far. I will make sure that there is a link to the free Rokoko add-on in the description for anybody who wants to try and get that working, but for this tutorial, we're going to be using AutoRig Pro. Now, full disclosure, I've been using AutoRig Pro for over a year now, and I have recently become an affiliate. That means that if you use the link in the description to buy a copy, I will get a small kickback for recommending it. So if you're interested in getting a copy, it would be really great if you could use the affiliate link, as this is a great way to support this channel. So with all of that out of the way, where do we get some good motion capture data? As many of you will already know, the best place to get started with Mocap is Adobe Mixamo. You will need to sign up for an Adobe account, but everything in this section is free. You don't need to sign up for the subscription or anything. And they've got stacks of motion capture data. Like, there's currently 48 per page showing, and there's at least 52 pages. So that's a lot of animation. It's also worth noting that they've got a bunch of character models you can play with as well. This library is a little bit old, so I wouldn't necessarily say these are the highest quality assets anymore, but they're perfect to play around with, and many of them would be fine for background characters. On the paid side of things, I would strongly recommend MocapOnline. Now, I'm not affiliated with these guys in any way, but I did buy their mobility package, which is currently going for about $100, and I freaking love it. It's a pack that comes with a whole heap of walking, jogging, and running cycles, as well as things like strafing left and right, turning, jumping, crouching, all of that sort of stuff. And what's really nice is that most of them link up with each other. So basically, if you were going to make like a third-person shooter game, this pack would cover 90% of your basic animations. They also have a free demo pack for anybody that's just looking to check out the quality. And my final recommendation is the Rokoko Motion Library. Rokoko make one of the cheaper motion capture suits on the market, which I am currently saving up for. But in the meantime, for anybody who can't afford the suit itself, they have this big library of motion capture data that you can get your hands on. There are some free samples in there, but most of it is paid content. Each clip is usually somewhere between $3 and $6. Now, admittedly, these costs could add up fairly quickly, but there's been times when I've needed a specific piece of animation, and the only place I've been able to find it was on the Rokoko library. So for those one-offs, very specific pieces, I've been more than happy to throw a few dollars at Rokoko and just get that animation done in a few minutes rather than, taking days to animate it by hand. So for this tutorial, we're going to go free, and I'm going to grab a specific animation off Mixamo. So I'm going to do a search for dribble, and I'm going to download this basketball bouncing animation. I'm choosing this animation because in the next lesson I'm going to show you how we can come in and tweak this animation to our liking. The download settings you can basically keep a default. The only thing that I'm going to change is to choose without skin, since we're going to be using the Suzanne Rig to retarget to. Speaking of the Suzanne Rig, you can download a copy of her from the link in the description. Now, in the past I've been selling this rig for a few dollars, but for these tutorials I've decided to make her a free download. When you download her, you have the option of downloading both a Rigify version and an AutoRig Pro version. The AutoRig Pro version is much easier to set up, but I suspect a lot of you will still have Rigify rigs, or maybe you're using, say, the Rain rig from the Blender Foundation. Now these rigs can definitely still work, we just have to set them up properly first. So I'll show you how to set up a Rigify rig so that you know how to set up just about any rig and make it work. Then I'll show you how much faster we can do this by using AutoRig Pro. So let's jump back into Blender and import our motion capture data. Here I have the Suzanne rig with the Rigify rig applied to it. I also have the AutoRig Pro add-on installed. Now just remember, when you first download this and try to install it, there are a couple of extra steps to installing AutoRig Pro. Just make sure that you follow the instructions that come with the download. So to import our motion capture data, I'm going to go File, Import. I know that this is an FBX file. Navigates to wherever you have your dribble.fbx saved and go and import the FBX. Let's just move this over to the side a little bit, and you can see that it's kind of hard to tell what's going on here. I'm just going to shorten this to 64 frames because I know that's how long it is. And when we hit play, you can sort of start to go, oh, okay, so that's the hand bouncing. You can kind of make sense of it, but it's a little bit all over the place. So let's actually just delete this, and let's go and import that again. Except this time we're going to go down to the armature menu and we're going to select automatic bone rotation. And now when we import this, our bones are actually in a much more easy to understand location or rotation. Over here on AutoRig Pro, this is how we set up a new rig, so we don't want that. What we want here is the remapping. And here we get to choose our source and target armature. So with the source, that is the motion capture rig selected, you can go and click this little eyedropper, it'll dump that in there. Then we can select our Rigify rig, which is our target armature, and put that into there. That is our Suzanne rig. And then we want to click auto scale, which will usually scale the source armature down to something that's a little bit more like the size of our Rigify rig. We then want to click the build bones list, and this is going to go through. It's going to go through our source armature here and grab every single bone and do its best to try and match that up to our Rigify rig. Now in this case, it's done a pretty poor job. We're going to have to set most of this up manually. So let's walk through that process. Now I know that it's managed to get our head bone correct, that's great, but I know from previous experience that even though this is called the hips bone, it's technically not the right bone on our Rigify rig. If I click here, we've got the one that's called hip, and that's the one that kind of wiggles her hips back and forth, but doesn't move the rest of her body. Whereas if we grab the torso controller and shift that around, you can see that this is the one that has our IK constraints for our legs and kind of moves everything else around a little bit more nicely. This is actually the controller we want. So with the hips target bone selected here, we can just click the eyedropper and it will swap that over to torso. Whoa. Hold on a second. Almost forgot a very important step here. To make all of this work, at least one of your controllers needs to be set as root. Now, generally speaking, in one of your Rigify or AutoRig Pro rigs, the root controller is considered the base because it kind of moves everything. Now, on these motion capture data rigs, they don't have a base controller as such. Usually it's the hip. So what we want to do is make sure that in this case, the hip, or in this case the torso, is set as root. Now, setting up arms, well, arms and legs, anything that can have both an FK and an IK constraint. I will show you how to set up both, but to start with, let's set up the FK constraints. So at the moment, I've got the IK constraints selected on the arms, so I'm going to need to go back to Item here. I'm going to need to swap it over to the FK, and you can see that doesn't actually change the rig here. That's because we need to go down to our rig layers and turn on our FK, and you can see now we get these little green controllers. I'm also going to at least temporarily turn off the IK so that we don't get confused. And then I will make sure that this is set to FK. We'll just test it there. Good, that's working. So now we can go back to AutoRig Pro, go to our left arm. Now you can see here we've got forearm and then we've got upper arm. So let's just double check on our rig here. This one is called left arm and this one is called left forearm. So we just want to make sure that we're matching these up correctly. So arm, left forearm. So this is left arm, which was, I've already forgotten, is the upper arm. So we want to make sure that we are selecting the upper arm, make sure that you have the left arm selected, and let's eyedropper that. We can then go to, in this case, the left foot. Now we've got the same problem here. This is set up with inverse kinematics. So let's swap both of these over. And again, go down to our legs and swap those around. So now we have forward kinematics. Again, let's go back here. We've got left foot. We actually want to make sure we've got the left foot, not the left shin selected, and eyedropper that. So I'm just going to go through and quickly link up all of these bones, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so a couple of things to consider. Firstly, you'll notice here that we've got spines and we've got a couple of them left blank. That's because our Suzanne rig only really has a torso control and an upper chest control, whereas in our original rig has 1, 2, 3, 4 spine bones. So you may need to do a little bit of guesswork as to which spine needs to match up to which controller here. So in our case, we've got the base one, which is our hips torso controller there, and we've got the top spine, which is spine number 2, on our motion capture rig, which lines up to the chest controller on Suzanne. Watch out for both spines and necks because different rigs can have different numbers of bones through them. A couple of other things is Suzanne here doesn't actually have a single toe control. You can notice on our original rig here we've got some toe controllers there, but this rig is set up to work with shoes, not multiple toes. So that's something that you would have to come in and hand animate. What else is there? There's toes, there's spines, and I think the only other thing that we need to discuss is the fingers. I haven't bothered to do those yet, but I'm going to show you why right now. So once we've gone and set up everything that we want to set up, we can export this setup so that we only ever have to do it once, or at least we only have to do it once for these particular rigs to try and match. So if we come down here, we can go under mapping presets and make sure that we've got this rig selected. We can export this. Now I've already gone and done this before. You can see here I've got a remapped Mixamo to Rigify rig. I did this yesterday and I've actually got my fingers and everything set up in that preset. So rather than wasting the time here, I'm actually going to go import. Now you can see here on our little arrow, we've got a whole bunch of presets here. These work very, very well, but they only work with the AutoRig Pro rig. I'll show you that in a minute. So let's go and import. And let's go and do the one that I created yesterday. Let's import that mapping, and you can see now all of my fingers have been filled out. This is great. It means that we really only have to do this once. So one last thing that we need to do before we go and retarget, we need to redefine the rest pose on our motion capture data here. So if I just go back to, let's just scroll to frame 0, I will go to pose mode, I will select all of the bones and I will reset its position and rotation by holding down Alt and G. And you can see that in its default position, this rig has a T pose, whereas in Suzanne has an A pose. This will mess up things later. So what we need to do is get this rig roughly in line with Suzanne. Now fortunately we don't have to do this manually. The AutoRig Pro comes with these settings for us. So we do need to make sure that we are in object mode and then click redefine rest pose. This will give us the option of using either a rest pose, which we can define, or a current pose. We don't want to be using the current pose because again, this is in a T, Suzanne is in an A. So keep this on rest pose and click OK. Now we want to go in and select the bones that we want to rotate. Now we can just select all and just go copy. I've found that that can mess things up a little bit. So I know which bones here are most likely to cause us issues. We can definitely see that it's the arms, so let's make sure that we go through and select all of the arms. And I think her legs are just a little bit more splayed than this one, so I'm just going to select the legs. In this case, I'm not going to select the feet. I've actually done some experiments, and in this case it does mess these up. So just the arms and the legs. Click copy. You can see that now pops into place. If for some reason some of your bones aren't targeted properly, you may end up with weird results. Make sure that you go back and change the bones, and then we just click apply, and we can go back into object mode, and this is now all set up. So with everything done, let's click retarget. And you can see that this can automatically detect how many frames are on your motion capture data. That's a nice little feature. Click OK. Give it a moment depending on how many frames you have. And then we can play the animation, and you can see that this has definitely worked. Now this rig is set up so that the eye controls don't actually follow the head. So let's just shift those around to the front again so she doesn't quite look like zombie Suzanne. And let's admire some of our work. So this is looking pretty good. This is very, very close to being usable in final animation. But I'm noticing it's not too bad on the hands, but if we look closely at the feet, you can see that they're wobbling ever so slightly. And that's just a little bit of noise that's built into our motion capture here. So we can either go in and we can manually clean that up ourselves on all of these different bones, which is a bit of a long and tedious process. Or alternatively, at the moment we're using FK, forward kinematics, on her legs here. What we can do is swap these over to IK, which then makes it a little bit easier to plant her feet where we want them. So let's just go in and let's retarget some of these bones, and I'll show you how to set up IK. So firstly, let's go back to the Suzanne rig, and let's make sure that these are set to use IK. That's back under item. We'll just swap that, and you can see that it pops back into the default place for the IK. Oops, I want the torso one. Turn that off, and let's make sure that the IK arms are set up. We can turn off the FK for now. And then we will do the same with the feet. Select that. Swap those over and turn off our FK and turn back on our IK. Back here in AutoRig Pro, we just want to find our our hands and our feet. So we've got our left foot here. Let's make sure that we select the left foot and swap that over to IK. Now to make this work, you also need to make sure that you select IK down here. And you also want to grab your pole vector constraint. This is the one that allows the knee to wobble back and forth, and make sure that you have the pole set. And then you can do the same for the hands. IK. Make sure that we've got the right controller there and set that as the pole. And scroll through here until we find the right side, not the arm, we want the foot. Select that, make sure that it is set to IK, grab your IK constraint, your pole vector constraint, then grab the right hand, set it as IK, and set up the pole vector. So now with that set up, firstly, it's probably worth going and exporting this again. So in this case, I will call it Mixamo, Rigify, let's go _IK. So we now have an IK and an FK if we should ever need both. We will re-export that. And let's go and tick retarget. Now when we play this animation, first of all you can see that these feet don't seem to wobble quite as much. That's kind of nice. But what's really good is once we go into pose mode here, we have full control over these keyframes. So I'm going to go and add in a ground plane. Just scale this up a little bit, and let's get her feet where we want them to be. So because we want her feet to stay planted, we can actually select both of these controllers now. We can actually delete all of those keyframes. We don't actually want them to move at all. And then we can go over to item, and we just want to make sure that this is set to 0 on the Z axis so that it's not penetrating through the floor. You can see it is a little bit here, but that's because we now need to fix the rotation. So the Z rotation is what gives it its around rotation, so we want that to stay at that 70. Let's set both of these to 0. You can see that tilts her foot back, and then we can do the same thing over here. Set those rotations to 0, set the location to 0, and now you can see that she's standing on the ground quite nicely. And if we go and play through our animation, you can see that now the feet don't wobble, and she's bouncing that imaginary ball very, very nicely. Okay, so we have another scene file here. This is the AutoRig Pro rig, and you can see that although it is very, very similar, this is a slightly different rig. So I'm now going to show you just how fast this is to set up if you've got AutoRig Pro installed and you're using an AutoRig Pro rig. So again, let's just go and import. Let's import our dribble, remembering to check the automatic bone orientation. Import that. Let's just shove him over to the side slightly. We will select him as a source armature. We will select the Suzanne Rig as the target and quickly auto scale that just to get our sizes right. And now you will see that when I hit the build bone list, that because AutoRig Pro knows its own rig, it can go through and fill this out automatically. This obviously saves us heaps of time. Now I have noticed that for whatever reason, there are a couple of little mistakes in here. So for example, here you can see that the right leg up for some reason has been linked to the left thigh. So you will probably want to change that. And from memory, there are a couple of other little, like really little mistakes in here. But because we're using AutoRig Pro, we can actually go to our mapping presets. We can go to our little arrow here where we've got some defaults, and we can choose, because we know that this has come from Mixamo, we can choose one of the Mixamo presets. So we experimented with the FK before and we found that the foot was slipping a little bit. That was something we wanted to fix. So this time, let's choose the Mixamo IK. And you can see that it changes a couple of little things in here. It's removed the spine. It's swapped over some of our fingers. Sorry, that was something I should have mentioned before. Suzanne, you can see, only has 3 fingers and a thumb, whereas this is based on a regular human, and it's got 4 fingers and 1 thumb. So this is smart enough to be able to go, okay, I'm going to remove one of the fingers from each hand. And we'll just double check that the hips has the set as root, which is working. We will still need to go in and redefine our rest pose, so let's do that now. Select, oops, just select, don't move them. Select our arm bones, select our leg bones, making sure not to select the feet because I know that those can mess up. Let's go copy the rotation and apply it. Let's set this to 64 frames again. And let's go retarget. And you can see, let's just turn our overlays off, we have immediately got our animation set up. And again, you can see that our feet are moving ever so slightly, so I might just go in here and do the same that we did before. Let's just delete those keyframes, go to the item, just make sure that these are set to 0 on the axis we know we want them on. I'll again just throw in a plane so we can see her on the ground. And you can see, boom, in like, I don't know, a minute or so, we've copied our motion capture data across. And if we want to, we can always come in here and move things around. Now, in terms of being able to change some of this animation, we have the same problem that we had before. If I just turn auto key on and I shift her up so that she's standing up ever so slightly, you'll notice that I go to the next frame and she pops back down. So this keyframing here, because every single frame is keyframed, that doesn't really work very well for us. Fortunately, AutoRig Pro has some tools built in to help us deal with this. Let's go down to the interactive tweaks. You need to make sure that you have whichever controller you want to move selected. So here you can see that we do have the hips. Make sure that that is selected. And we can go to either our rotation or location, and we can just tweak this a little bit. So I think I want to move this, up in the Z? No, that's actually moving her forward. So let's go the Y then. Oops, sorry, rotation. Plus Y, and you can see now we can start to move her up and down a little bit. So you can see here we're getting a little bit of pop on the arm. So let's select her hand. We want the, which one's this? This is the left hand. So let's make sure that we've got the left hand selected, and we might also just pop that up a little bit. And you can see now that she's standing ever so slightly higher, and the motion capture stays on the rig, it doesn't break. So this is one way of being able to come through and tweak your animation after the fact. In the next lesson, I'm going to introduce you to the animations layer add-on. which gives us a whole heap of more control so that we can come in and much more easily make some of these tweaks. So I will see you in that lesson.